Hello and welcome to the LUniverse virtual planetarium from Lancaster University. The following is a recording of one of our free live public shows that we ran during early 2021. I hope you enjoy.
This is what you should be able to see if you were to go outside tonight in Lancaster. I mean, it's very optimistically what you'd be able to see because weather here tends to be pretty bad. It's been quite sunny today, but usually we're besmirched by grey, rain and clouds on our night sky. But if it was perfectly clear, this is what you'd be able to see. A large array of stars, galaxies, but most importantly, for today at least, constellations. Let's get that going. Da-da-da-da. Now, for those of you that have never heard of these before, a constellation is a collection of stars visible in the sky with lines drawn between them to create shapes that represent people, animals, or objects. The stars in a constellation are typically nowhere near each other. Some are incredibly far away from us, and some are actually quite close. So that means the stars themselves have no physical connection to one another scientifically. Bear with me, I really want to try and show this point as well as I can. And I've never tried this before, but let's give it a go together. So when I say that the stars in a constellation aren't connected, I actually really am trying to mean that they are 3D objects. They're not 2D objects, and the distances between them are quite large. So if we were to sit on the Earth, as we tend to do in the middle of our solar system, and have a look around, we can see all the constellations in the night sky that we would expect to see. Let's choose a famous one, maybe Urschemina over here. The thing is, that only works because of how we're viewing Urschemina. It looks like, well, what many of you would refer to as a plough, but it's not actually that shaped. If we were able to actually have a look at all the constellations, you would notice that they are not these flat objects, but actually more like just a web of stars that we viewed from our own planet. They're 3D objects with huge distances between some of the stars. So the nice, flat and easy to view constellations that we normally see are actually a tangled mess and web of stars. It just so happens that we can view them from our regular vantage point. I hope that was at least somewhat interesting to try and prove my point there, because it's quite a difficult bit of programming to run. Fab stuff. So with all of this in mind, now that we know what a constellation is and they're far away from each other, and we know all of this, why do we have them? If they are such distant objects with no physical connection to each other, these stars aren't in a straight line, they're really far away, why do we have them? Why do we classify constellations? Why do we have 88 of them, in fact? Well, it's because humans love telling stories. Greek, French, Dutch and Polish astronomers from hundreds to thousands of years ago told stories of monsters, gods and heroes. These stories were symbolized by the stars they watched every night, joining dots to create pictures in the stories that they told. And these exact stories have been passed down for generations to reach us today to give us the constellations that we see each and every night. So let's start by one of the easiest to spot constellations at this time of year. All you need to do is look up in the sky, orientate yourselves and find this big W, or at the moment and tonight it will look a bit more like an E than a W, but it is what we class as the big W in the sky, and that's Cassiopeia. It's a great one to try and spot because all the stars in it are nice and bright and it's visible all year round, in the northern hemisphere at least. So what's the story about Cassiopeia? In Greek myth, Cassiopeia was a very vain person and she liked to boast about how amazing she was. And so for those of you that might be a bit younger, vain means you think you're amazing and brilliant and beautiful. A bit like myself. Fair enough. This naturally went down like a lead balloon with all of her friends, so much so that the sea god Poseidon threatened to flood her entire kingdom. Oops. To save her kingdom from destruction, she was told to tie her daughter Andromeda to a rock as a sacrifice. But before Andromeda was horrifically killed by a sea creature, the hero, Perseus, who we'll come back to later, came along, killed the sea creature, freed Andromeda, and then married her. It's a pretty good day for Perseus. Both Andromeda and Perseus were later made into constellations as well, which is an extremely high honour in Greek mythology. So the quite valid question is, whatever happened to old Cassiopeia? Well, the gods didn't want her to go without punishment, so they eventually turned her into a constellation too, but not this time as an honour. She is shown here looking into a mirror, showing everybody that looks up into the sky just how vain she truly is for the rest of time. A feature in Cassiopeia that's actually visible through binoculars is a cluster of stars known as an open cluster. Its official name is NGC 457, but it's more commonly called the Owl Cluster. Apparently, the cluster looks like an owl with those two bright stars forming the eyes. Now, so the owl is technically on its side a little bit. Now, you're free to make up your own minds, but I can't see how even for a second this thing looks anything like an owl. Then again, I've done this quite a few times, and every time I would look at it, it gets more and more like an owl. Up to you. Definitely up to you on that one. Love it. All right. Now, I mentioned the hero Perseus became a constellation. So let's explore that one a little bit further. Perseus can actually be found next to Cassiopeia. Perseus can actually be found next to Cassiopeia and his wife Andromeda. Now, Perseus has a really interesting story and is actually symbolized in his constellation here by that weird head that he's holding. Perseus was once tricked into agreeing to bring King... Before we start saying a load of Greek names, I'm just going to get something out of the way. I like Greek mythology. In fact, I love Greek mythology. I find it really interesting and very exciting. I have, as you may have noticed, a very strong English accent. To pronounce these Greek names correctly, for me, is not only near on impossible, it's very unlikely. So I will be butchering pretty much every name today, and I can only apologize. Perseus was once tricked into agreeing to bring King Polydectes, the head of the only mortal Gorgon, Medusa, one that you may have already heard about. She's famous, Medusa, because her gaze from the snakes that form her hair, as you can see there, would turn anybody that looked into her into stone. Oh dear. So, it was questionably quite a tall order for somebody to have to go and kill Medusa. To find where Medusa lived, Perseus went to visit 3 women who lived in a cave and shared just one eye, the Griae. Now, Perseus managed to trick these women and steal their eye, holding it to ransom until he got the answer as to where Medusa lived. He then managed to get that, and before he set out to go kill the Gorgon, the gods couldn't help but intervene. Hermes gave him winged sandals, Athena gave him a polished shield, Zeus a mighty sword, and Hades a cloak of darkness. With all these gifts in hand, Perseus set off for the island of the Gorgons. Perseus very cleverly uses the shield to sneak upon Medusa by looking at the reflection in the shiny surface, so he never has to look at her directly. It's a clever little workaround for that curse. As a note here, many Greek myths actually have stories of how people bent the words of wishes and curses for either gain or benefit. Midas's golden touch is one that always springs to mind. Anyway, with Zeus's sword in hand, Perseus cuts off Medusa's head and quickly stuffs it into a satchel. Medusa's sisters actually try and attempt to kill Perseus here, but he uses that cloak of darkness to quickly escape. Upon his return to the king, Perseus isn't met with the hero's welcome that he so rightfully deserves. The king hoped he would die in this task, and so he orders him to be killed right there in the throne room. Quick thinking on Perseus's part, he opens up the sack and points Medusa's head towards the king, turning him into stone. Perseus, which is also visible all year round, includes the beautiful cluster NGC 869 and NGC 884, known as the double cluster, which you should be able to see there as 2 clumps of stars. Open clusters like these are actually relatively young objects in our universe. They contain a few thousand stars and are held together loosely by the gravitational attraction to one another. But because things are quite spread apart, the gravity isn't all that strong. It doesn't actually take a lot of disturbance for this cluster to break apart. So some large objects moving through or them colliding with other galaxies, things like that, will basically cause these clusters to scatter. Meaning clusters like this only exist for a few billion years, which might sound like quite a large number, but on a galactic timescale, it's really quite short. Now, on to another constellation that is visible at this time of year, and one that I really, really like. Pegasus. It's visible during certain parts of our day, but the whole thing can be quite hard to view sometimes. Now, when Perseus killed Medusa, Pegasus, the winged horse, emerged from Medusa's neck. How a mythical winged horse managed to emerge from the neck of a dead woman, we're just going to gloss over. Pegasus was a majestic and beautiful horse, and all those that wanted to fly on it, because it could fly through the air, a massive, massive, exciting thing that I would definitely like to do. However, Pegasus was a shy horse and didn't want to let any human have ownership over it. It therefore took an exceedingly high amount of time, energy, and effort for the hero, Bellerophon, to finally tame Pegasus. Once he had Pegasus and Bellerophon, I can never tell how it's meant to pronounce Bellerophon, yeah, became inseparable. Bellerophon rode Pegasus to go and defeat the Chimera, a terrifying monster. This terrifying monster had the head and body of a lion, the head of a goat sticking out from its back, and the snake at the end of its tail. Quite weird. As a side note, I always wonder how much independence these animals have, or how they would even communicate. Who was in charge of the feet on this animal? I really hope it wasn't the snake, otherwise there might have been a bit of trouble for the rest of them. Anyway, the fire-breathing Chimera was no match for the fast-winged Pegasus. Sadly, like many people that achieve great things, Bellerophon believed he was so impressive that he deserved to live on Mount Olympus with all the other Greek gods. No prizes to anybody for guessing of how well that went down with the head of the gods, Zeus. Yeah, Zeus sent a gadfly to go sting Pegasus, causing Bellerophon to fall to his death. Pegasus continued up to Olympus and ended up working for Zeus, holding his lightning bolts and carrying important family members on its back, which apparently was a very high honour, high enough that after years of diligent service, Pegasus was turned into a constellation, although notably without its back end. Oh well. Visible just below the southwest, Pegasus is a very large constellation and is actually connected to the Andromeda constellation. Inside Pegasus, we find a globular cluster. This specific globular cluster is M15. Now, they're a bit like an open cluster because they're just full of stars. But unlike open clusters, globular clusters are spherical objects, like you can sort of see. They exist in the halo of a galaxy, which is a term we'll come back to a little later. They're very old objects and they're typically full of quite old stars. They live for an incredibly long time, unlike open clusters, because of that tight gravitational binding. It means they can stay together for a lot longer. They're very hard to disrupt, and they are really some of the oldest things in the universe. We'll move now to one of the most famous and easy to spot constellations, Orion, or even more famously, Orion's belt. To spot Orion, look southwest. You should be able to see 3 very bright stars that make up the belt. Those are the 3 in the middle along his belt there. It's not visible all year round, so it's worth taking a look now whilst you can. Orion, also known as the Hunter, might be a common and easily identifiable constellation, but its story is less well known. Unlike many Greek myths, it's not survived in its entirety, with multiple variations of his death existing. One of the more interesting versions of this legendary hunter's death is by the sting of a scorpion, which would later become the constellation of Scorpius. Interestingly, as Orion sets and goes below the horizon, Scorpius rises above it. So the two are never in the sky at the same time. Many constellations actually have significant placements like this. How a constellation moves across the sky, and if other constellations are either close or far away, really mattered to the Greeks who created these sky figures. But Orion doesn't just include stars. Like many other constellations, it has something very beautiful hidden inside of it. In this case, a nebula, or the M42 nebula to be precise, which we can see here as this beautiful bright pink region. Now, a nebula is the birthplace of many, many stars. You can actually see all the stars around the gas here. And there are in fact be many, many more right in the centre there that you can't see because it's blocked by all the gas and all the dust. Parts of this cloud, over millions of years, collapse under its own gravity. Eventually, with enough mass, pressure and heat, it becomes hot enough and dense enough for fusion to begin, which means it can form stars that are very similar to our sun. So our sun would have started life in something fairly similar to this. Whilst we're having a look at this beautiful coloured photo, people often ask, is this what space actually looks like? Short answer, no, not really. Long answer, well, sort of. I've done a little bit of this myself, colouring images. Mine were nowhere near this pretty, but I tell you, it is possible and somewhat scientific. When we use powerful telescopes to look this deep into space, the image we get back is in black and white. But astronomers know what certain types of gases should be coloured because they can understand how they interact with light. They can also look at some of the features from an image to then work backwards and go, well, that should look like this. Additionally, if you take an image in the red, green and blue wavelengths, you can then combine those images to create a coloured one in a very similar way to how your phone makes colour by combining red, green and blue lights. If you ever actually put your phone under a microscope, not that that's something we typically all do, but it is possible. If you take your phone and put it under a microscope, you can actually see little strips of red, green and blue lights, and that's how you get these colours. So that's how we do some astrophotography, when it's this deep into space at least. Cool. With that in mind, we'll take a quick detour now from constellations that you can see at this time of year by having a look. One that isn't visible right now, but will be a bit later as the year goes on. It's very exciting and very impressive. We have to mention Heracles, or Hercules, as he's known in the Roman/Disney equivalent. It's quite a fun film. The deeds and misdeeds of Heracles are far too numerous to go into here. We could easily have multiple shows just talking about each of his many, many adventures. But the most famous set has to be his 12 labours, set by his cowardly and unpleasant cousin, King Eurystheus. Sure. The 12 labels were, and now really be ready for me to butcher this. Oh, this is going to be bad. Right, there are 12. It's kill the Nemanian lion, to kill the Lernaean Hydra. Oh no. The capture the Creanian hind, the Erymathenian boar, clean the stables of Agus in one day, to kill the Stymphalian birds, capture the Cretan bull, to steal the mares of Diomedes, to steal the girdle of the queen of the Amazon, to steal the cattle of the monster Graean, to steal the I knew I was going to make that one wrong. To steal the Hesperidian apples, and finally to capture Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld. They are great stories, and I thoroughly recommend you go look them up with better spelling and pronunciation. We'll come back to the second one, the Lernaean Hydra, a little bit later on. Now, interesting, Heracles, if you ever look up at the constellations, is shown to be standing on the head of the dragon Drago, which was the dragon that guarded the Hesperidian. Sure, apples. Why this labour of all the 12 was chosen to be the one that Heracles stands over for the rest of time, I'm not really sure. Now, once Heracles had finished his final labour, getting Cerberus out from the pits of Hades, the underworld, and this is a ferocious, massive three-headed dog, he brought it back to show the king. The king was so terrified of the dog that he famously jumped and hid inside a vase to try and hide. He then let Heracles go free without having to complete any more labours. This scene, rather unironically, has been depicted on many vases throughout history. The Heracles constellation includes what is undoubtedly my favourite image that I'm going to be showing today, and one that I am going to give us a little bit of time to sit and enjoy. I really think it's quite pretty. This is called the Heracles cluster, a cluster of about 200 galaxies, all approximately roughly 5 million light years away, meaning the light from these galaxies has taken 5 million years to reach us. We're looking backwards in time here, 5 million years backwards in time. So if we actually went there, this cluster right now will look entirely different to this. How cool is that? This snapshot that we can see is long since over, but this is what we have to experience. I just love this. This is so cool. We'll touch a little bit more on galaxies and what they are and talk about a bit more a little bit later. But I would be remiss to not let you look at this amazing image taken by, I believe it's the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. It's the SDSS. Yeah, Sloan Digital Sky Survey was in charge of this one. Beautiful, beautiful image. People often ask me, again, in stuff like this, why is it square? It's a very good question. It's not because galaxies stop with a sharp edge like that and the universe just goes, nope, we're going to make a perfect little square of galaxies and give up. It's simply because it's the size of the image that was taken in this survey. A telescope, just like a camera, has a maximum field of view in the area that it can see. And so what's happened here is the Planetarium software has taken that image and then placed it at the correct place and size in the night sky. So when we zoom in, it appears as it would do in the real sky. Whilst we're here, we should have a little look and you should try and see if you can notice some merging galaxies. I've noticed so far 3 of them. There's one fairly close to the centre, just off to the left. Really good stuff. Absolutely adore this picture. Now, I would promise I'd mention one of Heracles' trials in a little bit more detail. Heracles was sent out to kill the fearsome monster called the Hydra, an immortal beast that spits out poison. Oh dear. Now, we're going to have to zoom out here because the Hydra is an exceptionally large constellation. There we go. It's the big snake one in the middle there. Huge. Now, Heracles charged into battle and with one fast swing of his sword managed to cut off the head of the Hydra. Pretty good job, Heracles. Job well done. However, this monster had a really dastardly power. By cutting off one head of a Hydra, 2 grow back, meaning every time Heracles managed to decapitate the Hydra, the fight only got worse. Realizing the approach of cutting off the head was definitely not working, Heracles asked his cousin, Iolaus, to help him. Whenever Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus would use a very hot sword to scorch the Hydra's neck and stop another head growing back. Eventually, after doing that, only one head was left, the immortal one. When Heracles managed to cut it off, he took the head and placed it under a rock, such that it could never harm anyone ever again. The Hydra is by far the largest constellation in our night sky, spanning a huge distance, as you can see here. However, it is sparsely populated, made up of only a few stars. One cool feature in the Hydra has to be the planetary nebula, NGC 3242. They don't have very good names. A planetary nebula is what happens when a star like ours dies. So our sun will eventually become a red giant, which means gets a lot bigger and then engulfs the Earth and things go a bit wrong. In some of the later phases, eventually large solar winds are generated and it blasts off a lot of the top layers of the star. These solar winds are full of amazingly dense materials, stuff that makes up our planet. So it's going to have bits of carbon in it. It's going to have maybe some bits of oxygen. and they form a nebula around the remnants of the star like that, and in the center would probably be a white dwarf. Fab. Next, we will have a look at my favorite of all the constellations. Absolute favorite. It's one that you will all definitely know. It is Ursa Major, or more commonly known as the Big Dipper, the plough, the saucepan, the frying pan, the pot, the object that holds water. Many different names. You can easily spot this one in the sky all year round. The 3 stars there that make up the tail are the handle, and the 4 stars that make up its bum are the pot or the saucepan bit. Fab. Now, in Greek mythology, Ursa Major is the great bear, and it comes from this story. Zeus, or Jupiter is known in the Roman equivalent, falls in love with a beautiful woman called Callisto. Zeus's wife Hera, rather reasonably, isn't particularly impressed with Zeus falling for another woman. Hera then finds out that Callisto has a son called Acas, and she thinks that Zeus might be the father. In a rage, she turns Callisto into a bear. Decades pass until one day, Acas is out hunting and comes across a bear in the woods. Acas, being a great hunter, gets ready to shoot the bear, meaning, without knowing it, Acas is lining himself up to kill his own mother. Zeus, high up in the heavens, sees this unfolding beneath, and, feeling a bit guilty for causing all of this problem in the first place, he decides to prevent this accidental murder. Using his powers, he turns Acas into a bear and makes both him and his mother into constellations. That's why the big bear, Ursa Major, is looking over at the little bear, Ursa Minor, to this very day. And you can see Ursa Minor just off to the left there, above my head. I really hope I'm in the correct place, otherwise that looked really stupid. I look stupid anyway. Just like Orion, Ursa Major has some interesting features. Most notably, the M101 spiral galaxy. Now, we've mentioned galaxies a little bit. I'll go into a bit more detail right now. A galaxy is a massive collection of stars going around a central point, and that central point is typically a supermassive black hole, like the Muse song, or a collection of different black holes all orbiting each other. A galaxy has 3 main parts: the bulge, which is the stuff in the center, sort of a spherical, the disk, which is the spirally arm bits that you can see, and the halo, which is essentially another sphere around it that contains globular clusters, open clusters, and other such. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is also a spiral galaxy and looks a bit like this one. In the Milky Way, there are 2 major spiral arms coming out from the center, as well as 2 minor spiral arms. On an incredibly clear and dark night, you can actually still see the Milky Way as a milky smudge all the way across the sky. And we can see our own galaxy, this smudge here, because we are looking into the galactic plane, which has a thickness of 1,000 light years. And as the Earth sits in one of the outer minor spiral arms, we can look right in towards the center. It actually takes us 250 million years to complete just one orbit around our galaxy. Inside each galaxy, we think there are about 100 billion, so 100,000 million stars. And astronomers believe there are 2 million galaxies, each with the same number of stars. And each one of those stars is like to have a planet orbiting it, just like how our sun has a few. The universe is a seemingly endless place. So that brings us to the end of our quick tour around our constellations and the deep sky objects hidden behind them. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about what you can see in the night sky and maybe some ideas of what to look for next time you're out on a dark and clear night. There are many books, websites, apps that are amazing at guiding you towards constellations, so definitely go and have a look yourself. So this neatly brings us onto questions. So if you haven't already, pop them into our Q&A box that the wonderful moderators will be able to go through. I'm sure they've got a few that they would like to ask me now. Brilliant. I will stress, though, I am only a fan of Greek mythology and my knowledge is more limited than others, including our Q&A guest for next week, George, who is an absolute expert at Greek mythology. So if you've got really detailed, very complicated questions, definitely ask him next week. But I would implore you to do a bit of Googling and have a look at some of the fantastic stories out there and learn how to say them properly, unlike me. All right.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions come through. So the first one is, do non-Western cultures have different constellations, considering ours are based on Greek mythology?
One fantastic starting question. Absolutely love that one. Yeah, so when I said there's 88 internationally recognized constellations, that's through the International Astronomy Union, I think. IAU does that one. It's basically a consortium of countries have gone, yeah, these are the ones we're going to classify. But you're completely right. Other cultures have their own constellations, and different cultures have arrived quite with a few of them quite similar, but no, each culture does have their own set. There's actually some debate about where some of ours come from. I was reading a little bit earlier today. Well, I was reading actually some of the research for this show, how some of the ones that we would take definitely come from Greek mythology, actually could have come from some of our earlier civilizations that then fed into the mythology that Britain adopted part of the Roman conquest. So there's some really interesting history in there, and I would implore you to go have a little look-see at it. Some really cool stuff. Great question. Thanks for that.
Next question is, what is the biggest constellation? And following on from that, we've got another that's, what is the smallest constellation? So those two go quite well together.
Ooh. I have my little book. I can always check these things out. I will get the answer to the second one. I know what the biggest one is. We visited it. It's the Hydra. It is an absolutely massive constellation. It spans, I think, 103 degrees of arc, which is basically how we measure things in space. It's massive. It really is insanely large. It's not particularly. You can see quite a lot of it from the northern hemisphere, but not huge amounts. It's mostly in the southern, I believe. But it's really quite a stunning one. The smallest, I don't know off the top of my head what's the smallest one, but I can definitely find that out for you in just a moment.
Thank you very much, Andrew. The next one is, what is your favourite constellation?
Fab, that's really cool. My favourite is, as I mentioned, Urschemina. I love it because it's the first one that I learned as a kid. So years and years and years ago, my dad would take me out on a nice dark night, which I come from Essex. Not that my accent would ever give that away. I am from Essex, and I really don't sound like it. We had a lot of light pollution because we're on the border of London, sort of. We get a lot of London light pollution, so it's quite hard to see things. So we can only ever see the really bright ones. Urschemina is such an easy one to spot. It's the Plough, the Big Dipper. You can see it every night as long as it's clear, and that's the one that I was taught. And only as I got a bit older, to learn a bit more about what constellations actually were and some of the stuff around them, I was like, oh, that's really cool. I can use this to talk about galaxies as well. So no, Urschemina, definitely my favorite. And I found out what the smallest one is. I had a guess, but I couldn't be sure. I don't want to say it wrong. It's Crux, which is essentially a crucifix. It's quite a boring one, I'm not going to lie. It's literally 4 stars that are just lined to a cross. I might go find it on the Planetarium software in just a moment, but it's, yeah, boring, I think, is the understatement. I could tell you who made it. Not all of the 88 constellations, I should say, whilst we're sort of talking about this, are Greek. As I mentioned before, it was Dutch, Polish, Greek and Roman. There may be another set for these 88 at least, that made them. So it's French. I knew it was somebody else. It's the Greek, French, Dutch, and Polish astronomers have the rights to the naming of all the constellations that we recognize today. Some of them are better than others, and I could definitely do, if people are interested, a bad list and just go through what I think are some of the worst constellations, because I'm quite happy to show how bad some of these actually are.
Thank you, Andrew. So your favourite constellation is visible all year round. We've got a question from Flora for which other constellations are visible all year round?
There's quite a few. Oh, you're really testing me now. Let's go. Cassiopeia definitely is. I believe Andromeda, Perseus is. Fortunately, there's quite a few. Urschemina would be as well, considering where it's placed, I believe. There's quite a few, but it's not massive. I believe it's around sort of 10, 12 or so. You can quickly give that one a little Google and they are all there. But a lot of the ones that I showed in the beginning are nice and easy to view all either right now or all year round. Good question, though. I'm going to see if I can get a who's who of the bad ones.
So whilst we're doing that, we've got another question from Matilda and Ellie Glow, who say that we are in Cambridge, so how different does the sky look here from Lancaster?
Fab question. I will just put myself back up now. That's a really wonderful question. Thank you for that. So pretty much the same. Absolutely. Like the UK is very tiny. Lancaster's not that far away from Cambridge, although it may feel it sometimes. We're on the same line of longitude, so it doesn't make any difference. Of course, but our latitude, I think I'm getting that around the right way. I always mix it up. Our downness on the Earth is not that different. So our viewing points are basically the same. So there's very little difference for any observation in the UK. Top of Scotland, like the very top of the Highlands, and the very, very south of the UK may have some very subtle differences, but it's so small that on the constellation scale, it's not worth worrying about. But that's a really good question. Thank you for that.
Are there any phone apps that you would recommend for stargazing? Is a question from Lou.
Ooh, that's a lovely question. What ones have I used? So funny enough, the program that I'm running here to do all of this for you today is called Stellarium. It's really good if you want to do more like a deep observation of the different stars and constellations, so zooming in, having a little look. Stellarium is a completely free open source software. Anybody could use that. It's mostly web-based. I think there may be an app, but I don't know how good it is. Really, I use whichever one that I have currently got downloaded, and was then the first one that I picked up, because functionally, as long as it has GPS, so that when you turn and tilt your phone, it follows where you are, and essentially a compass as well, that's all you're going to need. And then it should tell you what you're looking at, and that's really helpful for doing some quick observations. Anyone that also allows you to put it into red mode is really good, because red light doesn't affect your eyes as much in the dark. So obviously, if you want to be observing, you've got to take about 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust. If you then stare at a bright screen, you lose that and you have to do 20 minutes again. So if you have a red light and like a red head torch and stuff like that, it's not as bad. So any app that allows you to have compass, GPS tracking, and a red mode are my big recommendations. But really, any that are free on the App Store or Play Store or equivalent will be fine.
Which constellations are best or easiest to look for as a beginner, or if you've got children, is a question from Holly.
That is a great question, Holly. I will do the buttons I'm meant to be pushing because I'm still trying to find the worst constellation. I'll show that in just a moment. I love it. The best and easiest are some of the ones I mentioned today are all quite easy to spot. The best is definitely Urschemina, because you can definitely spot the Big Dipper and the Plough really easily. I'll just bring that one back up for you now, just so we can have a look at it again. Let me just push the correct button for that one. There we are. So let's have a look if we can find it. So if you're looking in the night sky, there's Urschemina right there, and if there's our ground. So that's where we are at this time of year. So this is what tonight will actually be. So it's at roughly, actually that's today. So let's go to, this is at 8 o'clock tonight. So it's in the northeast, Urschemina, straight up, there it is. Not to be confused with Urschemina, which is very similar, but a lot smaller. So Urschemina is the big one, Urschemina is the small one. That's definitely easy to spot. Orion, also very, very easy over here in the south. Those 3 stars that make up its belt, super easy to spot. That's why I like to cover that one. And finally, which one are the ones? Cassiopeia, which you can find because it's near basically Perseus and all that. Urschemina, go across, big W in the sky, although an E at this time of year. You can find Cassiopeia, that's in the northwest. Really good ones to go and spot. Try and see if I can find the worst one whilst I'm here. If there's another question, happy to answer.
Well, whilst we are looking around for the worst one, Lauren says, what is the most far-fetched story behind a constellation that you can think of?
That's such a good one. The most far-fetched story I can think of are the people who thought that some of these constellations were good ideas. So Triangulum, yeah, there's a triangle. That's just like, why would you? The story behind somebody going, yes, that is what I'm going to dedicate these stars to. A triangle. I always think that one's quite funny. I like the story of Pegasus emerging from Medusa's head. I think that is incredibly bizarre. I always wonder how that one happened. So that's definitely my favourite of them. There are definitely more, and I would thoroughly recommend picking up a book, going on the internet, and finding out a couple for yourself. There's some really, really cool ones out there. There it is. I knew I'd find it eventually. Here is my favourite constellation for being rubbish. Canis Venacti, Venactici, sorry, or Deci, I don't know. I really can't pronounce words. It's 2 stars with a line drawn between them, which is then meant to represent 2 separate dogs. It's literally 2 stars on a line. Just a remarkable lack of imagination. It's not a Greek mythology one. It's one of the either French, Dutch, or Polish ones. So it came a bit later, which really then gives them very little excuse as to why this is such a bad one. But I would be remiss not to point this one out for just its hilarious nature. So we had Izzy asking me the question today. Thank you. And we had Pascal working hard behind the scenes to make this all work. Thanks, Pascal.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little more about our amazing universe. Our team from Lancaster University also runs shows for schools, community groups and more, both in person with our portable inflatable planetarium and online. But any in-person events are subject to current COVID restrictions. If you're a teacher, community group leader or part of a similar educational organisation, please do get in touch. We're particularly keen to make connections with those in our region of Lancashire and Cumbria, but we'd love to hear from you wherever you are. But for now, take care and keep learning more about the amazing wonders of our night sky. Thank you.